Welcome everybody to our Wednesday continuing medical education series. And it's my pleasure today to introduce Phil Werdell, Phil Werdell is going to speak to us about food addiction treatment. First I'm going to introduce him and then I'm going to go feed my own food addiction right in the back. But just a little bit of a history. I'll let him tell you his own story, but he's got quite an impressive story professionally. He completed his undergraduate work at Yale University, where he was Scholar of the House. You'll have to tell us what that means. He holds many degrees and has worked at many universities. His postgraduate work has been at Columbia, University of South Florida. He's a Fulbright Scholar, did a Corning Fellowship, and he was a certified addiction therapist at Glen Bay Psychiatric Hospital in Tampa as well. He has worked as a lead therapist in this field for some time, and he co-founded Acorn Food Dependency Recovery Services in 1993 and the Food Addiction Institute in 2004. He's a member of the Food Addiction Research Program at the University of Massachusetts School of Medicine as well. He has numerous publications, which I will not list. He has written just a ton of stuff on this subject, which is really kind of in the addiction field. The whole concept of food addiction is newer, and there's a lot of new science and a lot of new therapy that he's going to tell you about. So it's my pleasure, before I go begin eating my sandwich that I'm looking forward to in the back, to introduce Phil. Thanks.
Thank you. It's pretty exciting to be here. I'm teaching a course on food addiction, the first academic course on food addiction, to a group about 1/10 this size. And to begin to be able to share with a larger group is very exciting. I did want to just say that the lecture I'm going to be giving today is sort of like a coming attractions. If you're interested, if you become interested, we're developing a very substantial lecture series which we give at our professional training, which includes a lecture entirely on the physical craving science of food addiction, several other science lectures, a number of very specific lectures on practical issues about how to develop abstinence and food plans and in food addiction, and how to deal with denial. And we have several stories of people, the advance of the disease and then the advance of recovery. On the material you have, in the little brochure, which is of my business, food addiction, it's Acorn Food Dependency Recovery Services. You'll see in the back pictures of one of our food staff, actually the co-founder. Would you stand up, Mary? This is her. All of those pictures are of her, Mary Cushie. One of the things that I've been told when we've lectured is that people have gotten more from listening to her whole story. She is a late and final stage food addict who was in residential treatment for food addiction twice and in a halfway house for food addiction for several months, and has been abstinent and maintaining, as you notice, about a 200-pound weight loss for 22 years? 22 years, yeah. So that's another one. Yeah, right. We're cheerleaders for people in recovery. The way this is going to go, this lecture, is that the first part, I'm just going to go through giving you an outline of what we're doing, and then we're going to do some work on the basics of food addiction. Some of the best scientists in the world are at the University of Florida, so some of you may already know a lot about this, but many do not. It's pretty new stuff. Mark Gold, who's the director of the psychiatry department and everything else, is just put out a textbook, what I call the first textbook on food addiction. It's called Food and Addiction with Kelly Brunell, and I was really grateful to be the person who wrote the treatment sections. I think that's my bona fides. The second part of the lecture is going to focus on some stuff that I don't think has ever been presented at an academic level or a university level, which is things that would be needed for food addiction treatment, like what's the difference between eating disorders and food addiction, and what's the difference between treating alcohol and drugs and food addiction. Actually, I think of food as a drug. And the last part, we'll be giving a short suggestion about how food addiction treatment for people who are professionals and physicians could be brought here. This all started about 3 years ago when Mark Gold brought Mary and I up to talk to Scott and Dr. Disney about the possibility of an impaired physicians food addiction treatment program. We were all very excited. No, that's not true. I was very excited about it. All of us thought that it was a really good idea, and none of us had the time or passion to do it then. Mark just wrote about this program in the recent food and addiction text, it's called Food and Addiction, a Comprehensive Medical Handbook, comprehensive handbook. And when I was reading it, I was working with 2 or 3 physicians myself, and I said, these are people that really could use this. And it got me thinking about how could we actually start and do something. Okay. What I want to do, this is my disclaimers. I own the Acorn Food Dependency Recovery business. I'm a founder and board member of the Food Addiction Institute. I have several books, including the one that you have out, or self-published essentially. I have my own publishing imprimatur at Evergreen Press. So that's my disclosures. We're going to do a short review of the basics. The big issue is the difference between obesity, eating disorders, and chemical dependency on food. You'll hear a lot about that. We have a whole lecture just on this. Sometimes we give 3 or 4. It's such an important issue. Some of the evidence from the scientific research, what is the progression of food addiction and what are the recommendations for treatment as you go along, and then how do you assess? Oops, I went the wrong way. We're then going to go into particularly a residential or substantial treatment program in food addiction would deal with, and talk about, as I said, the difference between eating disorders and food addiction and other addictions and food addiction. And at the end, we'll I'll just mention this proposal. I'll just say it's very simple. What I think we're proposing is to have a weekend at which anybody that's interested in experiencing food addiction recovery or learning about it from the participant's point of view would come. And then people that were interested and felt they need it would then come to one of our week-long intensives, probably held right here. Then from that we would design the next parts of the program, which would include, like in our professional training program, several intensives through the year and probably quarterly weekends. We'll talk more about that. So the first thing I want to just say is that if you get anything out of this lecture, this is it. This is it. Obesity is just a physical medical problem. Eating disorders are a psychological medical problem, and food addiction is chemical dependency, just like heroin, cocaine, crack, alcohol, all of the process addictions. This is the key distinction. The truth is that when we work with people who have all 3, and it's quite complex. But as you know, if you have an addiction is primary. If a person does not deal with the addiction, they're not going to deal with therapy very well. As we say, not many heroin addicts and not many people binging on sugar can do therapy and really do it well. Also, you don't expect much work on obesity. This chart, it's in your ACORN brochure, but it's also on the wall here, and we will probably have another version of it coming. I'm not sure if it got handed out. This is about this, and every lecture that I have given to people who are food addicted, to people who are counseling food addicts, to people who are trying to get public policy about food addiction, to doctors who are trying to figure out how to assess and refer, always begins with this chart. This is just an elaboration of what we had of the three: obesity, eating disorders, and food addiction. We call people who are obese and are able to diet normal eaters. Let's say obese and overweight. But one of the things that it's important for us to tell people that we deal with is that some of the people who are quite overweight do not have an eating disorder or food addiction. They just eat too much. And I can tell you an example of this, which is my father, who came into his doctor when he was about 50, and his doctor said, if you don't lose a lot of weight, and if you don't keep it off, you're going to have a heart attack. And he had his cholesterol and his all the other stuff, blood pressure to go with it. My father said, what do I need to do? The guy gave him a pre-diabetic food plan. He went home, asked my mother to make it for him from then on, and he started taking his lunch that she made everywhere he went. He lost 80 pounds in about 3 or 4 months. Never had to look back. This is a normal eater who is obese. When they have a crisis, either their food clothes don't fit or they have a serious issue like this, they can lose weight. And we have a lot of statistics about people doing that in Weight Watchers, where we find out that 10 to 30% of the people in Weight Watchers actually lose a substantial amount of weight and keep it off for a year. That's usually used to prove diets don't work because it's only 10 to 30%. But what's important to know is that 10 to 30% it actually does work. And what the issue then is entirely calories in, calories out. And a matter of a reasoned and will-powered decision to do this. Some people can't do that. And some people can't progressively do that, and they fall in two categories. One of them is an emotional eater. These are people who eat over their feelings. They have comfort foods. This is the way it's talked about. It's the way I used to talk about it. Basically, this is an eating disorder. There is basically either a person does not have the skills to deal with certain emotions, or they've had trauma and have not had support to resolve it. The emotions are too extreme. And what happens is they find out that food and other things like purging and binging and restricting actually can medicate this problem. So the problem really doesn't have to do with their weight or even their restricting or binging. It has to do with the fact that they have not been able to deal with their inner life, their feelings, their conflicted thoughts. So this becomes a problem primarily of therapy, of relearning the skills that kids in healthy families learn when they're kids. If the parents are emotionally healthy, that they usually teach kids this very early. But I personally had to relearn them at 44. Not relearn them, learn them for the first time, and then had to get the support to deal with this. So the thing that's interesting about eating disorders is that when people are treating them, they always say you have to eat all foods moderately. Because the issue is learning to have internal balance, to be able to tell the difference between physical hunger, emotional hunger, and spiritual hunger. And you learn, and so the goal is actually to make this person into a person who can be a normal eater, who if they're overweight, they can, or if they're binging or purging or restricting, they can just stop. Or if they're overweight, they can diet as effectively as a normal person. This is going to be a very key issue as we talk about the professional issues. Food addicts are very different, and they do not fall into the category of normal or emotional. Well, actually, they have these problems, almost all, but the key issue is very different. And the difference is that some foods, when digested and go into the bloodstream and pass by the frontal lobes of the brain, start to change some of the receptors, just like alcohol and other narcotic drugs. A lot of that science goes on just down the road at the university. It's one of the best places to get it. But the key thing is that when what happens is the receptors, primarily the dopamine receptors, are weakened, and therefore they need something stronger to be able to work. If they don't work, you not only don't feel good, you don't have a sense of well-being. So your body starts saying, to have a sense of well-being, I need to have these dopamine receptors work. It turns out the same drug, the food, sugar is the primary one, actually serves as that. So people start using food to feel better. And it turns out that the body then shifts and it starts craving the food. So physical cravings are different than hunger and different than having a food that you eat because of you want to just deal with your feelings. What turns out is your brain's not working correctly. It says to have a sense of well-being, I need that food. And what happens is that if you do that, then that progresses and you start getting more, wanting more and more. Then basically, for a food addict, you get fat. And you say, I don't want to do this. And you start to try to diet. Well, it turns out the brain issues are in the unconscious. And they are stronger than the conscious desires. And food addicts start getting the same thing alcoholics and drug addicts get, which is stinking thinking. They start having some thought that allows them to pick up, even when they don't want to be eating. I'm a food addict in recovery. I'll mention that later. But mine primarily one was, I'll start dieting tomorrow. And I had a lot of evidence as my disease grew that I wasn't starting tomorrow. But that didn't matter. This was an irrational thought that was driven by the craving and the disease. And then what happens, and this is for me the key, is that you get enough problems from the neuroses you usually have when you're a food addict, and you get enough crazy thoughts, and you get this sense that all of these thoughts, I want to eat, I'm no good, I should be able to do this, that they are me. They are me. And in fact, they are disease thinking. They're either neurotic thoughts from trauma, or they are chemically induced thoughts supporting the craving. But you start thinking, I always have to say that this is me, and then you've got a bigger problem. Now you've got what I call a spiritual problem. You do not know who you are. And there's a disconnect between the sense of self and people who come and work with us, people who are very low-bottom food addicts, will say, well, I put it in my mouth. I was the one who decided. That was not true. The disease decided, and they have associated themselves with the disease. This is where this becomes just like every other addiction. What happened here? It is. I was surprised that was there. So the deal is that in food addiction, what you need to do is you first of all have to stop the biochemical process that creates craving. So you have to take the foods out that created it. That's the first thing. You've got to define an abstinence. A very simple one often is people eliminate sugar in various ways. High-fat foods are similar. Some people eliminate junk foods. It gets much more complicated as the disease gets more complicated, and people, actually food addiction is an addiction to several different foods, all of which have different neurological paths. And what you can see in this slide is that as the disease progresses, you have to do different things. In pre-disease, you try to get education. Most people don't know this. I never was taught it as a kid. My grandmother died of food addiction. She had a massive heart attack when she was obese, trying to eat a rice diet, which was her, 40th diet. And she never heard the words food addiction. If she had, she may have had a different chance. And if people heard it earlier, they may have made some different decisions earlier. In early stage food addiction, these are people that would call themselves, oh, I'm a chocoholic or something like that. What you need to do is you need to detox it and remain abstinent. And what we believe is that many people could do this at the early stages. The problem is the negative consequences aren't sufficient yet. So they go ahead, and you get to middle stage, and this is where a person finds out, as I did in my own life, that diets didn't work, therapy didn't work, trying to control things just didn't work. I found where else can I go? And I went to a counselor and later went to food addicts. In late stage food addiction, it turns out that even going to Overeaters Anonymous or one of the 7 other 12-step programs for food addiction is not sufficient. It's like a person going into Alcoholics Anonymous and they can't get abstinent, they can't get sober, can't put down the drink. And what very few people know is that in the 1980s and 90s, there were major residential treatment centers all over the United States for food addiction using the addiction model. Their primary people that were coming to these were people in Overeaters Anonymous who couldn't get abstinent. If a person walked into an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and they were drunk 4 or 5 times, somebody would walk them down to the detox. There actually was beginning to be such a thing in America in the 1980s and 90s, and then the insurance companies just stopped funding addiction model treatment for obesity. And there were a lot of consequences of that, but that's what is needed. In later stage, and this is the type of thing that Mary, who went to one of these treatment centers twice because she relapsed once, needed more structure. So she needed a halfway house that was set up to be able to be food abstinent. This saved her life, I think. My guess is that the combination of the second treatment and the food, if she had not done those, she would not be here today. We have many people we see who are in that place. I personally, as a recovering food addict, had 2 near-death experiences before I came close. One was a heart attack, one was insulin shock from a specific addictive food. In the final stage, you need primary treatment. You need to have a hospital-based primary treatment. That's actually one of my interests in having there be a treatment program here, because I think that both the resources and the energy and the validity and the sanction would be able to help us get up a hospital-based primary treatment program, so that you're not only dealing with food addiction, you're dealing with the fact this person has late-stage diabetes, this person has tremendous joint problems, this person, if they're a purger, it may be putting out their esophagus, if they're anorexic, they have serious medical problems, ones that I, in my own business, we can't handle. We have to say, no, we can't work with you. We only work with people who do not need direct medical supervision or hospitalization. I don't know what happened there. But if that happens, people will die. And I can just tell you that besides my grandmother dying, I have had many clients die, even when they had 12-step support, even when they had treatment. One of whom I had staying in my house for 6 months. Had no way of going into any other place. We said, okay, we'll make you a halfway house at our house. At one point, she decided she could do this on her own. 3 months later, she had a heart attack and died. That's a person who died of food addiction. And that's where this goes. I am a very strong advocate for us getting back to having primary care. Okay, what's the research? The thing that, if you want to see the research from a food addict's point of view, go on to foodaddictioninstitute.org. Where we have the first scientific white paper. It's on physical craving and food addiction. We have a copy here for any of the staff people. We'll leave one that is available if you're interested. But you can also, it's Sharon, C-H-E-R-E-N, and a whole bunch of others that are on our International Advisory Board. And basically this is the research. Number one, they have found that there's a genetic marker that people have on the D2 dopamine gene if for some people who are overweight, very overweight, and can't stop binging. It turns out it's exactly the same marker that many people have who are alcoholic and who are drug addicted. Second, there's animal research actually done again by someone here, Nicole Ivana, has just put out a book on this, a medical text. 7 minutes to go, 25. So what it shows basically is that all of the experiments with animals that were done to show withdrawal, tolerance, progression, dependency, when you put people on particularly sugar or saccharin, they do the same thing. And at Princeton, they came out finally summarizing just the sugar experiments, and they said animals can be addicted to sugar. The references are all in there. The brain imaging research, again here, is that when you look at a person's brain, if they are out of control with food, it looks like a cocaine addict's brain. Actually, it looks more like a methamphetamine addict's brain. But it turns out that, just to jump ahead, the biochemical research is that when a person starts binging and then restricting, that's called dieting, overeating and then dieting. When they start doing this in a cycle, both humans and animals start creating an endogenous opiate. That means their body creates what they need to deal with that harmed dopamine gene in the brain during the restriction periods. It's much smaller, but there's been research where if you use same population, if you create an opioid blocker, people who are on the blocker lose interest in cookies, cakes, candy, junk food, you name it, popcorn. The last piece of research. All of this is summarized with a lot of citations in the book. Actually, you'll find there's an appendix in the book that you have that has all of these with the primary researcher. But they're summarized more carefully in the Food Addiction Institute's white paper, Physical Craving and Food Addiction, a Review of the Science. The thing that isn't talked about much in the scientific literature, but is a much more impressive to a person who is a clinician or a food addict, I am both, is, did I do that something wrong? I'm okay, is the outcome research. If you look at Overeaters Anonymous, Food Addicts Anonymous, there's a whole group now of 12-step groups dealing with food addiction. It turns out that about half are able to be abstinent when they put down their binge foods. That's the primary issue. They're able to do that. And then they work the 12 steps and get some support, just like a drug addict or an alcoholic. There is also some outside research of this. Again, you'll find this in our work. The other thing there is that in one of the treatment centers at Glen Bay Psychiatric Hospital of Tampa, which had, I still think, as good a food addiction treatment program as I've ever seen. That's one I worked at, so I may be prejudiced. But they had 8,000 clients go through there. And of them, after 1 to 5 years, a third of them were still abstinent. This doesn't mean they just lost weight. This means they were not using any of their addictive foods. 1/3. That means these people were, I think this is the proof. We have the exactly same statistics from Acorn. The book that you have on your seat is about our intensive. When they started not funding treatment, we created a freestanding workshop. It's a residential workshop where people meet in people's homes. We essentially get 12 people together, bring two of our staff, and do the same exercises and protocols that people did in treatment. We have the same data. About a third after a long period of time. These are people who dieted, couldn't diet, couldn't use therapy, couldn't get abstinent in OA. The protocols, they go through the primary intensive, and a third stay abstinent for very long periods of time. Another third, if they keep coming and we build an extended program, doesn't even have to be 6 to 8 weeks together, but if they come to our program just before they think they're going to go out again, and the disease is incredibly clear about this, all you got to do is find out how long it took you to relapse the last time. That's the time you are likely to go out again the next time. If people did that, these people have very strong progression. They don't become abstinent stably right away, but everyone that I know who has stayed with the program and kept coming is now abstinent. So this is treatment outcome research. And I'll say something quick about assessment. The primary mode of assessing food addiction is by elimination. This is the only thing we had back in the 80s and 90s when we were doing these things. If a person just kept having diets and then gaining back weight, if they went to therapy and took it seriously and worked on their feelings and their prior issues, and they still, as in my case, got worse around their food, what was left? Well, maybe they're food addicted. And that's how people would get to the treatment centers in the 80s and 90s. By now, we have a number of ways of assessing. One is the 12-step programs, of which I'll give you a whole list of. But they all on their websites have the same type of assessment instrument as AA and NA do. Take these questions. If you have 3 of them, you're probably an alcoholic, right? I had 10. The second thing that we have is, in my book, Bariatric Surgery and Food Addiction, at the back, we've published the assessment instruments that we use in treatment to challenge denial. So there's an assessment instrument for, are you a normal eater? Do you have an eating disorder, anorexic, bulimic, binge eating disorder? Are you a food addict? At what stage are you? And we use these in treatment not to assess people who should be there, but to give people some very basic data on themselves and to be able to compare to each other and the other data we have. The most useful peer-reviewed assessment tool now is the Yale Food Addiction Scale. I actually have a few problems with it, but we use it. Yale has done some work on withdrawal in our work, and they've used it with us, and we're confident that it is valid. The problem is it has language in it that food addicts say, why are you asking me that word? And we would like to correct it. But it's a valid scale. And one of the things that they've just, one of the key people that put this together just published a series of journal articles in which they found out that of people who have binge eating disorder, this is the new diagnosis, which will become official in a month, really. That people are already using. Of those people, half rated very high on the food addiction scale. And what they found out also was that these people also self-identified as having cravings, which was not something that all the people with binge eating disorder said. So this is a very strong scale. I'm working with a research team at University of Massachusetts Medical School right now, where we're going to try to put together what we think is the next stage. Stay tuned. But the number one way of assessing food addiction is to act like you were a food addict. What you do is you eliminate the foods that are your binge foods. You put yourself in enough support to find out, to be able to keep them off and deal with any issues. What you will find is that in 3 to 4 days, you will know that you had just gone through withdrawal. And if you continue to have that support, you will know that you are thinking differently and feeling differently and have more choice about dieting than you had before when you had those substances in you. That's the way people get. It took that to prove it to me. When I treat myself as a food addict, I'm a much better person. Just to share with you, up till I was 44, I was dieting and gaining, dieting and gaining. I went to therapy of all kinds, became a professor of teaching therapy, and did a lot of that. And as you heard, had a heart attack and had a number of other pretty negative things. What happened is that when I started treating myself as a food addict, the first thing I did was wrote down all my binge foods. There were 76. I am a serious food addict. I didn't even know how to eat without eating those. But it took me a couple of weeks, and I found out how to eat 3 moderate meals a day without any of those binge foods. My cravings went away. Then all of my feelings came up because I was also an emotional eater, and I went to the 12-step rooms and to other food addicts, and I started working on my issues with the tools of the 12 steps. Several years later, I deal with those issues well. I like to say I'm maintaining an 80-pound weight loss. I'm also not this full of myself. And that's what's happened. When I treat myself as a food addict, I get the rewards of being a food addict. What are the commonly addicted foods? Sugar, high fat, salt, flour, artificial sweeteners, caffeine, and alcohol. Each of these seems to have a different biochemistry and brain neurology. I don't know if that's the right word. Neural something. That's not what I'm trained for. One of the things that's useful is to see what's different about people being treated for eating disorders and people who are treating for food addiction. An emotional eater focuses on feelings. A food addict focuses on getting cleanly, rigorously abstinent first. An emotional eater, a person with an eating disorder, moves towards being able to moderately eat all foods. A food addict learns to live with complete elimination of those foods. I'll just tell you that I've been abstinent from 7 binge foods for 27 years. I've weighed and measured all my meals. I'm coming up on 10,000. Life is good. That's different than when I was trying to figure out how to fight a craving and a brain difference that was created by a food addiction. Emotional eaters use mindfulness training, so does food addiction. Emotional eaters use cognitive expressive CBT and expressive therapy. Food addicts in early treatment try to get you to be able to deal with the feelings that you're likely to eat over. It's a very different strategy. The strategy is to support abstinence. In emotional eaters, you're trying to develop empowerment, take back your power, be able to eat. In food addiction, you're trying to accept that you are physically powerless over your brain chemistry, over certain foods and often other addictions. In emotional eater, the goal is returning to normal eating. As we said, food addicts, it's a lifelong management of a food addiction one day at a time. I think it would be useful at this point for you to hear a food addict. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, but I've brought one that's willing to talk a little bit more. This is Dana. Dana is a nurse, and I'll just say by way of introduction, a very good nurse. And if anybody needs, what is that work you do?
Nurse case management.
Nurse case management. They've got a company. If you want to get connected, give her a business card or your name. This is a very high level organization. But more to our interest is that she's a recovering alcoholic. Hi, Dana.
Hi, everybody. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thank you. My name is Dana. I am an alcoholic. I'm also a recovering drug addict and a food addict as well. So thanks for having me here today. I'm just going to talk real briefly about my food addiction, how I know that food addiction is real, how I know I'm a food addict, and the ways in which my food addiction is remarkably similar to my drug and alcohol addiction. The symptoms are very much the same. The first symptom is the mental obsession. Just like alcohol, food was all I thought about. My thoughts were completely dominated by food. What was I going to eat? How was I going to get it? Who was going to see me? I have a friend who's both a recovering alcoholic and food addict, and he says, when you have the same argument going to the bar that you do, then when you go to the grocery store and you lose that argument, that means you're addicted. And that was how it was for me. My head tells me the same lies with food that it did with alcohol, like maybe this time it will be different, I can quit tomorrow, maybe I overreacted when I got sober, maybe I overreacted when I got abstinent, maybe I'm not addicted. These thoughts alone are things that prove to me that I am truly addicted. They are the mental obsessive thoughts of an addict. The next sign and symptom is physical craving, or that actual physical allergy to the substances I'm addicted to. When I took one drink, I couldn't stop. The same is true for my binge foods. I never ate just one cookie. If there was only one cookie available, I wouldn't even bother. I always had to have a very large supply of food, just like I did with alcohol. I would stock up and then I would start eating. I ate until I was sick, because once I started, I couldn't stop. And then when I started feeling better, I'd eat more, just like I did with my alcohol use. The next one is I had an inability to stop no matter how great the desire or wish. At the end of my drinking and eating, every day I would wake up and swear I wasn't going to do that today. And every day I would end up eating. Every day I would swear I was going to lose weight, because that's what I thought the issue was. And every day I would end up overeating. At the end of my eating career, I couldn't go one day without eating my binge foods, despite my best effort. And I really believed I wasn't trying hard enough, when in reality I was trying as hard as I possibly could. Willpower was absolutely useless against my food addiction, just like it was against my alcohol and drug addiction. At the end of my eating, I was maintenance eating. There was no pretense of healthy meals. I didn't even bother buying lettuce and letting it rot in my refrigerator anymore. I just ate binge foods round the clock because I couldn't stop. I did desperate, immoral things to get food as a child. I used to steal money and walk incredibly long distances to get food. Even throughout my entire life, I would steal food from people. I would steal food from your refrigerator or your pantry. I went to really great lengths to get food. I would lie to cashiers. I'd have all these binge foods and pretend that I was going to a party. I mean, like they really cared, but I still made up stories. If my husband tried to stop me, I would have a very strong emotional reaction to him. I would throw away food in a state of disgust and then dig it out of the trash and eat it. I'd lie to my husband and tell him I was going to go do an errand and go to the bakery, things like that. Because of my food addiction, I suffered from physical, emotional, and spiritual bankruptcy. I thought I had a weight problem, but I found out that weight is just a symptom of the problem of food addiction. I was incredibly overweight. My clothes didn't fit. I had high cholesterol, high blood pressure, low blood sugar. Emotionally, I was depressed, suicidal. There's a saying, I ate because I hated myself. I hated myself because I ate. I was just in a very vicious, dark spiral. I was in AA and trying really hard to work a spiritual program and grow spiritually, but I was just spiritually completely bankrupt. I just couldn't connect with God. I was extremely depressed, suicidal, in counseling, and very lost. Another one is that there was a progressive addiction. I know I never had a normal relationship with food, but over the years I can see how my food addiction progressed and got far worse. My life revolved around food, just like it did with alcohol when I drank. My world became very small. I was very isolated and alone, and I avoided situations where I couldn't eat. I actually really just avoided life. I went to great lengths to try to control my weight. I tried every commercial diet program, non-commercial diet program. I did fen-phen, counseling, exercise, tried to throw up. For 2 years, I only ate food from the health food store, and I kept gaining weight. I couldn't figure it out. I suffered from denial. For 20 years, I'd say, I don't want to compare a can of beer and a piece of pie. That was how I justified my eating. But now I know that both of those, God forbid, if I were to pick up either, that is a major catastrophic event. And I consider them all a drug for me. I don't make one worse or better than the other. For me, the foods that I'm addicted to are a drug, just like an alcohol or a drug or cocaine. And so once I realized that I needed help, what I ended up doing was I went to Acorn. I got help. I went into an OA 12-step fellowship. And, it's the same principles apply as they do in AA. I need to be willing to surrender, go to any lengths. I'm 15 months abstinent now, and I am enjoying the benefits of recovery on physical, spiritual, and emotional levels. It's not about the weight anymore, but I am down 48 pounds. I'm free from the obsession and craving. I have a stronger connection with God. I don't feel as isolated anymore. My relationships with myself and with others and with God are improving, and I know that I'm really growing. I have to say, having recovered from both, I think that the recovery from food addiction was much harder because I have to eat. But food brought me to my knees just like alcohol did, and I can guarantee you that food addiction is real, that I truly am a food addict. Thank you.
What we have up here is what would be the elements of a successful residential treatment program. The first is that it emphasizes physical abstinence first. We call it abstinence first, absolutely. Second is that it had a nutritionally sound food addiction plan, one that would support a wide variety of abstinences and was nutritionally balanced. We used the Glen Bay Healthy Eating Plan, which was approved by the American Heart Association and the American Diabetes Association. More to the point, we found that people were successfully detoxed in about a week, which is about the length of our intensive. People would use peer sponsors to commit their food. The key thing is that a food addict has to separate addictive food and non-addictive food every meal. And the way they do that 80% of the time when they begin is they commit the food they're going to eat. And they commit it specifically to a sponsor. And the treatment program that at Glen Bay and the one at Acorn builds the program around that. People commit their food specifically to a peer sponsor. Then we find out what happens. And let me tell you, a lot does. We have never had a program in which everyone was able to be abstinent. In most cases, people have run into exactly the same problems that they have outside. So we're able to address what the problem is they're going to run into and deal with denial through this process. There's education about the disease. There's an introduction to the food-related 12 steps. I'll give you a list of those. But one of the things to say clearly is that the food 12-step groups, you cannot be sure that it's going to be strong in your local area. So people not only have to be introduced to them, they have to be introduced to how to build and connect to strong recovery within the food 12-step movement. There's a lot of challenging of denial. I think actually that's most of what we do. When a person has finally accepted the denial, that they are in denial, they usually recover. We have a very particular process of doing that, and it's available in the Bariatric Surgery and Food Addiction book. We develop the skills to deal with difficult feelings and thoughts. As they come up, we deal with every feeling. Feeling comes up, we deal with it immediately. People learn how to do that in real time. They do this rigorous first step process, which is a story of their powerlessness over food. Where possible, not always possible in a workshop program, we involve the family. We have a realistic aftercare program for them. In particular, we connect them to people who are in recovery that have had similar experiences. A lot of the best recovery in the 12-step movements for food is done by phone, and so you can have a sponsor in another state or even another country. And we have a very large network of abstinent people that we plug people into. And finally, we have therapists who themselves are in long-term recovery. What do we got? These are the major 12-step groups. Overeaters Anonymous at the bottom is the largest, the oldest, the most diverse. At one point, it had 100,000 people in it. Half of them were abstinent. A number of these other programs have broken off from OA because people wanted to focus more on the food addiction side rather than the compulsive emotional eating side. So you have Compulsive Eaters Anonymous, which is the other way, Food Addicts Anonymous, Gray Sheet, which is a particular food plan, Food Addicts in Recovery Anonymous, Overeaters Outreach, which is Christian-based, and Overeaters Anonymous How, and 90 Day, which are movements within OA for people that are primarily food addicted and not emotional eaters. A lot more to be said about that. But thank you. For more information, there's two websites. One is foodaddiction.com. That's the business. It has a lot of information on it. Much more, and all of the research is on foodaddictioninstitute.org. And I'd be very happy to take any questions or comments or any remarks anyone had. Yes?
I just wanted to comment that for this first time, I kind of feel like the non-alcoholic.
I got it. So you're a normal eater. I got it. Blessings.
Here I was just thinking, wow.
Doesn't do a thing for you, right? Thank you very much. My guess would be that many people in the room are normal eaters. If any of you happen to be in AA or NA, what you'll find is there are a lot of folks there who find that after they've put their drugs and alcohol down, they then find the food comes up. And there's a whole stream of people coming into the food fellowships saying that they're doing with food, very much like Dana, what they did before. And then they find out that was a prior addiction, that they were actually addicted to food and alcohol, which is high in sugar, and cocaine, which of course is a narcotic like many of the foods, becomes a secondary addiction. So the other piece of that is that if you happen to be food addicted and you're trying to recover from drugs and alcohol, if you're still using food, you're going to have a hard time. There's a lot of data, professional research data, that alcohol and drug addiction recovery, it goes up remarkably when there's no sugar, no flour, no refined foods. Yes?
Did I hear you say earlier that you were planning to bring a week-long treatment here?
Well, that's what we're proposing. We actually came here with the proposal of a way of doing a startup for a impaired professionals and physicians program. And our idea was to use the workshop process and bring it here, and then add possibly that would be sufficient. It also is likely that there will be some people that will need more structured support, and that might become here too. That's down the line. The specific proposal we have is to begin with a weekend in which people act as if they are food addicts together. They commit their food, they have no sugar and flour, they talk about their feelings, they deal with issues of denial, find out if they are food addicts or emotional eaters or normal eaters who have obesity or eating problems. If people, for some people, we expect that will be enough in early stage. But if people are advanced, we think they're going to need the intensive. And about half of the people, or maybe more than that, of the people need more than one intensive. Food addiction treatment, when it's residential, tends to be 6 to 8 weeks rather than 4. And there are reasons for that. And one of the major reasons is that food often becomes an addiction earlier. And so there's a block emotionally. And the emotional issues that addiction does and stops our emotional development happens earlier for food than for the other addictions. Yes?
Did I hear you correctly? I might have missed the word that recovery from addiction, alcohol, or drug addiction goes up if there's no processed, low carbohydrate diet?
Yeah, you'll see the stuff, again, I refer you to the bibliography in the book you have, but also to the larger paper, Physical Craving and Food Addiction, and you'll see the studies that's exactly true, that at the treatment center where we had food addiction treatment, they had a drug and alcohol program. They took everybody off of sugar. Boy, they got angry. And recovery went up. We went to we aren't working now, with a large program in New Jersey, which is long-term and which has people who are have children and are needing about a year of care. What they found is when people got off of drug and alcohol, they were starting to steal candy and bread and hide it. And until they corrected that and introduced the issues of food addiction, changed the diet in the mess hall, in the cafeteria, they had real problems with that. I don't know the exact data on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on a strict diet of pizza, fried chicken, candy, and soda. Do I have an eating disorder?
Well, you are eating addictive foods, and if they're helping you deal with feelings, you may have an eating disorder. If you look at kids today, young people, that's their diet. Do you have really? We have an obesity crisis, and the latest book came out is the fellow Moss who wrote Salt, Sugar, and Fat. What he says is that the major food companies are addicted to putting sugar, flour, and fat into the foods because that's how they get market share. Just like the cigarette companies who used to carefully fine-tune the ingredients of cigarettes to increase market share, same companies own these. So that everybody is being addicted. And we will not have, I don't think, I didn't answer your question. I got off on a tangent there. Did I answer your question? I don't know. If you feel like you really want that, and if you think life would not be worth living if you had to put that down, then you've got a real problem. Yeah. 1 hour. Well, I get yes. Yeah.
So when you're saying sugar, are you including artificial sweeteners with that?
Well, a lot of people in the food 12 steps use artificial sweeteners. And there are now groups within those programs who are off of artificial sweeteners because the sweeteners started to be just as dangerous. The really interesting research is in France, where they do challenge with animals, and they put the little animals in their cages, and they had to either have sugar or cocaine. And they kept doing sugar, except the technicians who were doing it couldn't find any sugar, so they used artificial sweeteners. So they really, what we've done is the strongest addictive chemical that which rats will take over cocaine, even if they are addicted rats, is saccharin. And what we find is that people, a large number of people who have chronic relapse in our groups, we say, well, we write down everything you ate, and one of the things we find is that I have a lot of stories to tell about that. Yes, I meant that they're both addicted. Yes.
So you're saying that the danger of artificial sweeteners is they cause you to relapse on other foods?
And on themselves. And on themselves.
There's the danger of an artificial sweetener in and of itself.
Yes. I mean, we have people that steal artificial sweeteners, hundreds of them. We have people who steal them out of the kitchens in the houses that we are at, even though they're hidden. I mean, it's an addictive. This is an addictive substance for some people, and pretty lethal. Yeah, not very healthy either.
So what do you recommend as amount as far as like a low sugar diet would be?
Well, I think it's in the book that I showed you. It turns out that in real recovery, people have different levels of sugar abstinence. Some people at earliest stages just take out desserts. At a next stage, people might take out white. That includes flour and salt. At a next stage, they take out anything that has sugar up to the 5th ingredient in it. Now there are the people, that's the common measure for people who are in long-term food addiction recovery. And there are some people who actually are so addicted to sugars they can't eat certain foods that are high in sugar, like they can't eat fruits, can't eat carrots as a vegetable. That's unusual, but you can see. What we like to say is that if you had depression, you first of all find out what medication might help. Let's say it's Prozac. And then you find out what the dose is, and it might be from 10 milligrams to 100 milligrams. In food addiction, you first of all find out what's the chemical that is causing cravings. Then you titrate back to find out what is the level at which people can tolerate, because you have to have some sugar. Yeah. Huh. I guess we're good. Foodaddiction.com.